In this video, I'm going to be philosophizing on conflict resolution skills. Building conflict resolution skills is perhaps the most meaningful skill you may build, increasing your employability and or likelihood of being promoted, as conflict resolution skills are most sought by employers whom desire most for individuals to engage prosociality and or altruism in terms of their clearest communications, engaging more evidential claims with the appropriate resolutions to more complex problems, to solve the problems, not to exacerbate the problems, working to identify certain underlying psychological needs within conflicts, not irrelevant and or irrational and or inappropriate, yet that pertain uniquely to distinctions within the conflicts that one is communicating, engaging often reframing and or detoxification of others' communications that may be harmful and or hurtful, to build self-knowledge and or self-awareness as to what exactly is counterproductive within certain communications and what would be more productive within the communication, engaging in some cases the distancing of more heated communications to engage more detailed written communications, to provide clear communications as to certain issues that may be unclear and or need clarification in order to resolve complex and or probabilistic problems, not improbable and or irrelevant and or erroneous issues that one is engaging conflict seeking, distinct from identifying correctly hazards and or issues that are most probabilistically likely to result in the worsening of subjective well-being within the workplace and ultimately decrease satisfaction, decrease the quality of life and or life satisfaction and or meaning and affect in the negative direction for other employees. Building prosociality and or altruism that uniquely engages compassionate solutions to conflicts with brainstorming possible probabilistic solutions and or clarifying issues within the crystal clarity of one's communications, reframing within the paraphrasing, not necessarily always repeating exactly what the other individual has communicated, yet rephrasing to communicate meaningfully the key points and or most meaningful concerns, to communicate to the other individual that you were listening and or you hold some meaningful concern to resolve the conflict, instead of overlooking what they communicate and or antagonizing the individual that exacerbates problems. Individuals whom are more likely to be high conflict seeking are less likely, even in terms of individuals whom may hold strong conflict resolutions, to solve conflicts and or be individuals desire to communicate with, whom often result in more toxic, harmful relationships to others, straining even other individuals' relationships with other individuals that one may mutually be in terms of cooperations associated with, more likely to defect, meaning that these individuals are less likely to engage in meaningful cooperations, not uniquely cooperations within the conflict, meaning they more likely engage more selfish and or hostile and or social aggression in terms of their responses to cooperations, not uniquely conflicts, engaging conflict seeking that result in more conflicts compared to other individuals. had you within a week and or month and or year tallied the amount of conflicts of a individual whom is high conflict seeking compared to an individual whom is an altruistic creative problem solver, more likely to solve conflicts, the conflict seeking individual would more likely engage in conflicts with increased magnitude and or frequency compared to the creative problem solver who may experience 2 to 3 conflicts within a month per se, and or less. Individuals who are high conflict seeking may experience conflicts nearly every day and with multiple different individuals, not uniquely one individual. Often constituting certain dysfunctions within personality, who may have been diagnosed for not uniquely personality disorders, yet more likely post-traumatic stress disorder, as often individuals who engage conflicts tend to experience panic-related symptoms and or deficits in terms of learning and or memory, disabilities in terms of not uniquely conflict resolution, yet impairments and or deficits and or disabilities within recall of certain events and or engaging more hostile ad hominem attacks and or blaming the other individual instead of engaging more responsible conducts in terms of communicating what one is responsible for in the conflict and or clarifying what one thinks the other is responsible for, to allowance for one to build on the meaningful similarities instead of burning bridges and or antagonizing the other individuals with ad hominems. This is what clarifying certain underlying psychological needs, truly allowances and or disallowances, distinct directions of meaningful navigation within the conflicts with what one communicates in terms of clarifying certain needs that are mutual, as needs are more likely to be mutual, objective, and or functional and or meaningful instead of subjective and or dysfunctional and or meaningless, uniquely within the relevant and or appropriate needs within the conflict, not some other need as the other need that is irrelevant and or inappropriate and or meaningless to the conflict is more likely to be subjective and or dysfunctional to the conflict and the solutions to the conflict, and or inappropriate and or counterproductive to solving what is more immediate and or of most meaningful concern. Identifying the issues and or clarifying appropriately what the central issue is, so both the complainant and the plaintiff are able to appropriately resolve the issues. In terms of being an individual who is accused of engaging certain misconducts that one may not themselves perceive to be misconducts, one should ask for clarity and or to ask for what exactly is wrong with X conduct. Engaging then from the response, had one not heard the individual, paraphrasing and or reframing within what one may more but are responded to with crystal clear communications, meaningfully to define each term one may be uncertain about, and or clarify within the communication, and or be it one infers another individual may not hold the same complex vocabs as one holds, one should communicate uniquely with the meaningful similarities in terms of vocabs, and or clarify more jargon within one's communication to define certain words and or the definitions within those words to connect to the meaningful similarities, always proportionate to hold within the communication more meaningful similarities than the jargon, to moderate appropriately the analytic terms that the other more likely will experientially encounter difficulties processing within the communication, needing one to clarify and or connect logically with the soundness in communications, valid and or psychologically true and or meaningful communications, never invalid communications. Be it you think you are communicating what is valid and or psychologically true and meaningful with the incredibly intelligent, extraordinary mind you may have, you truly may not be communicating intelligibly to another individual whom is lacking the same existing prior vocabs as you do, needing you to not necessarily dumb yourself down, yet to build the other up in terms of providing them the, as it must be, good enough and necessary conditions. Clear communication within conflicts provides meaningful similarities the other may interpret within valid and or psychologically true and or meaningful interpretations of what one means from certain meaningful similarities in existing priors, to allowance for transparency in terms of communication, building on what is more meaningful to build perspective and or ingest complexities. This may need appropriate diction in terms of one's communication and or pronunciation to speak clearly, not just communicate in terms of crystal clear communications as one compositions certain complex sentences, yet to engage more diction and or the appropriate pauses and or responses with cognizance in terms of watching the other and or observing not uniquely one's verbal communications, yet combining that with nonverbal communications to build more intracategorical and or intercategorical effectivenesses and or efficiencies, meaning that within each analytic term there is a vast range of complexity that one should make clear within the communication and connect that to the intercategoricals that connect the other analytic terms to the sentence that one is communicating within the discussion to elaborate what's more meaningful, improving the effectivenesses and or efficiencies in terms of building up solutions and or avoiding worsening the conflict, antagonizing and or engaging ad hominem attacks to appropriately identify the issues and or solve those issues with rational, proportionate judging of what's most likely to work from often past existing prior conflicts that you may have experientially encountered and or have learned that the other may have solved and or may ask for what worked then, and or what, in terms of a cooperation, each may contribute in terms of brainstorming workable working solutions to allow it for the satisfaction of uniquely the relevant and or appropriate and or meaningful needs to uniquely the conflict. This allowances for building more cogency in terms of one's communication and ultimately experiencing more satisfaction that builds more pro-sociology and or altruism into the future that solves conflicts meaningfully. That's all I want to say for this video. Hope you have an awesome week. Keep moving this episode.